Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to introduce reality acceptance skills. The goal of these skills is to reduce suffering and increase our freedom in the face of really painful facts, and oftentimes when the reality of the situation cannot be changed. And in particular, we're going to focus on using radical acceptance. So this will be following distress handouts 10, and then 11, 11A, and 11B. So let's start with an overview of what reality acceptance skills are. These are a specific subset of distress tolerance skills when we find ourselves not living the life that we want. And most often, this includes facing circumstances that are out of our control. So, an example of this may be the death or loss of a loved one. It might be dealing with a difficult family member or the father of our child, right? Someone that we are legally or obligatorily involved with, and we'll have to continue to interact with that person. Consistent with our DBT assumptions, we all have a choice on whether we choose to accept or reject our reality. And our reality often does include very painful and difficult events. And so this set of skills really serve to help us accept and be open to how our reality is, rather than forcing our reality to be the way we wish it was, which can often lead us to feel more misery and struggle. So, reality acceptance skills really take the form of 6 different skills, including radical acceptance, which we'll talk about today, turning the mind, willingness, half smiling and willing hands, and allowing the mind. So, being mindful of our current thoughts. We're going to talk about radical acceptance today, as I previously said. So, what is radical acceptance? This is a complete and total openness to the facts of reality as they are. This means we're not avoiding, denying, suppressing, or throwing a tantrum because the reality does not fit with what we want. It requires us to be willing rather than willful when engaging in effective behaviors or problem solving. So the goal is to acknowledge what is currently unfolding, right? Whatever situation or difficult event we're currently facing, without having anger or a grudge, without maybe bitterness or meanness. Because despair, bitterness, resentment, undue shame, or guilt are often the results of failing to engage in radical acceptance. We can also think of passivity when an action is needed in the same way. And it is only truly by accepting the facts of, of a situation that we can engage in the appropriate action, right? Engage in behavior change. Radical acceptance is being fully aware of the facts that need to be accepted, right? Facts with evidence, accepting those. And it is only through that experience that we can bring about peace and eventually, with repeated practice, some level of contentment with our lives. So, when we talk about radical acceptance, a common question is, well, what do we have to accept? So, the first one is that reality is as it is. Facts, and this includes facts about the past and the present, even when we don't like those facts. We only have to accept actual facts about the present and the past and reasonable probabilities about the future. We have to be careful not to accept any distortions about the past. So, any of those thinking traps that we may find ourselves falling into. And this might be an exaggeration or catastrophic thinking or judgmental assertions, right? So, examples might be thinking, well, my mother hated me from the beginning of my life. No one ever wanted me in my life. I never get what I want. I hate everything about myself. I hate everything about where I live. My whole life was ruined when I got fired, or my partner is a jerk and my children are no good. All of those thoughts that I just said are distortions, right? And so those are not facts in the sense that they have evidence that we can objectively point to and say, look here, this is this fact. And indeed, when we have those sorts of thoughts, we might actually find that we're in emotion mind, right? And so getting into wise mind when we're trying to figure out what are the actual facts of the situation is really the first step. So to accepting reality as it truly is. Another example might be when we accept that a loved one has died. This is obviously very painful for us, and it's also necessary if one is to build a life without that person, right? Accepting reality as it is, facts about the past and the present, may mean accepting that death is a part of our lives. It's a part of our human experience and the series of events that all humans have to endure and face and grieve as part of our journey, right? That's just a fact, a piece of it that we cannot change. Similarly, if we are lucky to live long enough, at some point we will need to accept that maybe our hair is turning gray or we're losing our hair altogether. Our skin is not quite as elastic as it once was. All those changes are very much a part of our reality when we consider older age. We also have to accept the limitations on the future for everyone. A limitation on the future means that we may be less likely to achieve an outcome, a desired outcome in particular. So, a limitation we could think of like a probability. So, accepting these limitations or probabilities may be important in setting goals and in avoiding failures that will only decrease our quality of life. So the key here is that only highly likely limitations have to be accepted. Limitations on our futures are caused by a number of factors that have occurred in our lives, in the lives of others, and in our environment. If we do not change the causes that limit our present and past, then we cannot change, and reality itself will stay the same. So, some examples of limitations we may find for ourselves and for others may be our biology and our environment. And so, when we think about the biosocial theory that is the foundation of DBT, we talk about how others are. We all have different sensitivity to the emotional stimuli in our environment, right? And this can be biologically grained. So some of us are just going to be more sensitive to others, right? And this can be a problem if we're also in an environment that is particularly invalidating. So accepting that might be acknowledging that, I'm maybe more sensitive than my sibling or my friend. And that just means that I have to use more skills or be more mindful in order to avoid having a negative outcome, right? Maybe engaging in ineffective behaviors that have kind of led me to where I've been in the past, right? And so that can be accepting our past behaviors. What are the behaviors that we've engaged in the past that didn't really get us where we wanted to go? We also have to accept known realities, right? Like we talked about death or aging, maybe paying taxes. There are known obstacles that are going to come up in our life that we have to accept as part of, our human experience and just our journey here. Also, it's important to acknowledge that the effect of these limitations can vary. As you go through DBT, for example, you might notice that the impact of your biology, being more emotionally sensitive, might not have a great of weight when you're in a different environment, an environment that is very validating. In the same way, it might be very present in an environment that is not very validating. And so, just in that same way, you might see that the effect of your biology might differ when you're at work versus when you're with your friends versus when you're with your family. And so, if there is a situation that you need to practice radical acceptance, it's important to assess how your biology or environment are going to be impacted in that specific circumstance. What else might we accept? Everything has a cause. We really have to understand and acknowledge that things just don't happen for no reason. If a cause occurs, then the effect should also occur. Similarly, we are often dealing with the effects of something without knowing the cause. And acceptance from this point of view is really saying everything has a cause and everything should be as it is. The point of this statement is accepting what occurs in the universe and acknowledging that there is this phenomenon of cause and effect. So, what is cause should be, in other words. We can also say everything has a cause. And we can accept that this relationship between cause and effect exists even when we don't see the cause. So, for example, if I am in a car accident because someone ran a red light, I can accept that there may have been a million reasons behind the driver running a red light. Maybe there is construction that made it difficult for them to see the light change. Maybe it was the way the sun was hitting at the specific time that they were coming over into the intersection that made it hard for them to see. Maybe it was that the other driver was distracted taking care of their kids and didn't see the light change. Maybe they were driving really fast and couldn't stop in time because they were on the way to a hospital or dealing with an emergency situation. Maybe I was even driving in a way that made it seem like they could get away with running the red light or that the light had not changed. And so I don't have to like any of these reasons. And I also don't have to like the outcome, right? I don't have to like that my car is damaged or is totaled. However, I can understand that there is a cause to kind of how the events unfold, both in my life, right? I have a cause for being in that moment, and the driver has a cause for being in that moment. And that can really help me start to take a step towards accepting reality and living in line with my values. And that really brings us to our next and last point is what must be accepted is that life can be worth living even when it is painful. We all go through painful events in our lives. I personally don't know anyone who has escaped facing pain or great difficulty. Even if it doesn't look exactly the same way that my pain and difficulty looks, everyone has some sort of obstacle and difficulty in their life. Pain is part of our human experience. This is just the reality. And by understanding our limitations and that of others, we can start to see the causes quicker and have a greater understanding and ability to move forward in line with our values. And in this way, radical acceptance can really facilitate us building a life worth living, even in great pain. So, why do we do it? Why practice radical acceptance? Rejecting reality does not change reality. Rejecting reality usually involves avoiding seeing or experiencing reality. May also increase our struggle, right? And insisting to possibly the universe that reality should change right this minute. It may simply be denying the facts that are right in front of our eyes. And although avoiding and tantrums and denying might make us feel better in the moment, they do not change the facts that have occurred. And in line with our DBT assumptions that we review at the end and beginning of every module, um, judging and blaming might be easier in the short term, but they are not solutions, right? And so we really have to accept our reality in order for us to, again, have a life in line with our values. A parent, for example, may have a difficult time accepting that their child has grown up and left for a new city or a job. And that refusal could lead to unrealistic demands or unwanted advice or even over solicitous inferences in their child's lives. And that can ultimately damage the relationship with their child when it stems from this place of, I really want to have this closeness, right? And I don't want my child to grow up and have a life without me. And that desire can ultimately damage that relationship, sometimes even permanently. So it's really important to accept reality for that reason, right? To limit the negative consequences that rejecting it can often have. Another reason is that changing reality really requires first accepting reality. Problems that are difficult to see clearly are really difficult to solve. Refusing to accept an illness can lead you to not take care of yourself, which could even cause more illness or difficulties in your life. Staying in an abusive relationship, for example, maybe because you cannot simply accept that your partner is likely to stop abusing you, only leads to more abuse, right? Insisting that if a person really cares for you, he or she will do what you want, even when in so many ways the person is already showing that he or she cares, that will only lead to disappointment and perhaps even the demise of the relationship altogether. Next, pain cannot be avoided. That's another reason why to do this. Pain is just nature's way of signaling to us that something is wrong. And if we could avoid pain, we would absolutely do it. But if we did avoid it, we would be more likely to die young, as we could easily inadvertently get ourselves into dangerous situations that could easily kill us. Think about putting your hand on the stove, right? If you didn't feel that pain on the stove, you would not move your hand and in turn suffer more serious damage to your body. And in fact, research shows us that individuals who are born with no sense of pain actually have very difficult lives, as they must constantly learn to be vigilant so as not to harm themselves inadvertently. So, in this way, we must accept that pain is a part of our life. And ultimately, by doing that, it can use it as a to protect ourselves, but also to navigate life. The pain, for example, of grief causes people to reach out and find loved ones who might be lost or feeling lonely. And it can actually be a way to bind us to others in time of loneliness. And if we didn't feel that loneliness, we might not seek out to nurture those relationships. Fourth, rejecting reality turns pain into suffering, right? So I've kind of alluded to this a few times in our conversation already. Suffering, we can think of as a simple equation where suffering is pain plus non-acceptance that we're in pain. So even though pain can be difficult or almost impossible to bear, does not necessarily mean that we are suffering. Suffering is even more difficult than just feeling pain. It's a refusal to accept reality, and that suffering that goes along with it can interfere with our ability to actually reduce our pain. Next, refusing to accept reality can keep us stuck in unhappiness, bitterness, anger, sadness, shame, or other painful emotions. Accepting reality can actually free us and give us happiness. The drive to stop pain, no matter what the cost, is actually the opposite of freedom. And much of our life becomes about avoiding and managing pain that can't be solved immediately. So, although it is easy to think that we can just get rid of pain by positive thinking or ignoring or suppressing the pain, the fact is that these strategies often do not work, and our pain, once we experience it, comes back even stronger. Our use of these strategies is usually based on the delusion that we cannot stand it, and so we must avoid it at all costs. And that kind of can create this prison for ourselves. We feel compelled to do something to stop the pain, and we become slaves to our incessant urges to escape from the present moment. Therefore, by accepting our reality, we can actually free ourselves and even trust our own ability to kind of handle some of these more painful emotions without suffering. Next, acceptance may lead to sadness in the short term, but overall, a deep calmness usually follows. When I think of this statement, I think of the movie Up, if anyone has seen it at the beginning. The old man loses his wife, right? And there leads this great, great sadness. And you can see all the ways in which he's kind of rejecting the fact that he has to carry on with his life and this new world and all the changes that have kind of come about after losing his wife, right? Like he doesn't want to sell the house and keeps the house exactly as it was when they were married, even though a long time has passed. And it's only at the end of the movie that he's really able to accept the sadness and open himself up to this like life worth living, right? And though that acceptance often comes with a lot of sadness, it usually lifts the burden of suffering. So once radical acceptance, accepting all the way, has taken place, people feel ready to move on with their lives. The fear of sadness is often at the core of difficulties with acceptance. Like, I don't want to feel that sadness. There's no way I'll be able to cope. And then that keeps us stuck in kind of rejecting our reality. And there's absolutely no doubt that finally accepting the facts of a painful or traumatic past, or that one's present is excruciatingly painful, perhaps not even changeable, will indeed lead us to feel extremely sad, and for good reason. It's justified, it's valid. And for many, the fear of falling into abyss of that sadness is so overwhelming and too hard to even imagine. And this may be why, when losses are severe and irreplaceable, complete acceptance usually unfolds over a very long period of time. Yet once it happens, it really can be freeing and provides a sense of contentment. Lastly, why we should accept reality is that the path out of hell is through misery. And by refusing to accept our misery, we cannot begin to climb out of hell. Rejecting our reality keeps us falling back into that. Such a powerful visual. The only way through hell is to keep going. The bottom line is that only by going through a period of sustained misery can we come out the other side. We have to cross that bridge, even though it is incredibly painful and difficult. But by refusing to accept the misery, we often stay stuck. So that is why that exposure, for example, is such a critical component of the treatment for PTSD and other anxiety disorders, even though it is undeniably painful. So oftentimes people will say, I cannot radically accept this because of some myths that might occur about what it means to accept, right? Oftentimes we think accepting means approving or having compassion and love and maybe even being passive or staying stuck. So I just kind of want to take a moment to kind of go through and demystify what radical acceptance may mean for us. So radical acceptance is not approval. For example, people in jail for crimes they did not commit must accept that they are there, but they do not have to approve of the unfairness of this reality. Accepting the fact that we have been traumatized is critical to overcoming PTSD, but it does not mean that we have to approve of being traumatized. Accepting, for example, that we have high blood pressure does not mean that we approve of it. It simply means that we are accepting, saying that everything has a cause, and this is, I am where I am because of these causes, right? Radical acceptance is also not love or compassion. Accepting what people do or say does not mean that we have to love them or even have compassion for them. That's huge, right? Especially when we're dealing with a really painful and traumatic past. It does not mean that we have compassion or love for people who have hurt us and have led us to experiencing this great pain or trauma. Compassion certainly makes it easier when we accept, accepting certainly makes compassion easier, but it is not necessary in order for us to accept. We do not have to love people, animals, or things when we radically accept. You can radically accept that there are rats, or in my case, bats, in my attic without loving them, right? It's accepting that this is a problem and that this is something that I would like to change. And so taking the steps to move forward with that rather than denying or avoiding the bats or the rats in my attic. Radical acceptance is also not passivity. So many people are afraid to accept things because they fear they will then not try to change them. And they fear that this will actually keep them stuck. They will become passive and helpless. And actually, acceptance is the first step to change, right? I have to accept the fact that there are bats or rats in my attic in order for me to call the exterminator or my landlord. Um, we will only be passive and helpless if, at the same time, we fail to accept my feelings of dislike or disapproval, the possibility that I can make changes if I put in the effort, and the possibility that it is worth my time to try to change what I don't like. So, only if I accept those other things will I stay stuck. But actually, accepting the situation for what it is does not mean that I become passive or helpless. So, for example, on this slide, I put up this little image about COVID-19, right? When we have non acceptance, we might ask, like, why is this happening? Or I don't want this to be happening. This is making my life more challenging. I don't like it. People are stressed out, and I too am stressed out. I am shut inside my house all day. I wish it would end. I hate the mask. COVID sucks, right? And having all those thoughts, though very valid, right? Valid to feel, frustrated and trapped and even exhausted. Um, it could lead us to kind of fighting, right? And actually, only by accepting that COVID 19 is happening might actually propel us to take precautions. So, only by accepting that this is a phenomenon and how it is transmitted and the risk associated with it, might we do something like engage in wearing a mask, wash our hands more frequently, forego or change how we travel, right? Only by accepting are those actions possible. And so you can see in that example that radically accepting does not mean that I'm staying passive. And sometimes actually being passive, right? Failing to change, failing to adjust my lifestyle to account for this phenomenon might actually be rejecting the reality as it is. Radical acceptance also is not staying stuck. Acceptance alone does not change a difficult situation, but it does make it possible or more likely to engage in problem solving, right? And we just walked through an example of how that might be the case. Of course, there are some barriers to radical acceptance. It's really hard. We oftentimes don't have the skills for radically accepting in the moment or even at first when facing a difficult scenario. Many individuals try to accept, but simply have no idea how to go about it, right? Sometimes we even like white knuckle, like, I'm accepting, I'm accepting, I'm accepting, because we want so badly to say that we are accepting and to move past our pain. And at the same time, we are not using the skills, rather just kind of stating that we want to be accepting. And so this can be a huge barrier, right? Not having the skills, not knowing what to do in order to actually radically accept. So we're going to talk about that. So that should no longer be a barrier with continued practice. Another barrier might be that if we believe we accept a painful event, we are making light or approving of it. People often confuse acceptance with being passive or doing nothing to change or doing nothing to prevent future painful events. The two, however, are not the same. And in fact, as we've noted throughout our discussion, you can't change something that you do not accept. If you don't face the reality as it is, if you deny it, how might you change it? So if you want things to change, accept them, then change them. Because when we talk about accepting reality as it is, we are not saying accept reality as it is and believe it can never change. We are saying accept reality as it is so that you can change. Reality is always changing, right? We talked about this as being a core mental framework within our dialectical stance. And that truly is at the core of DBT, accepting that reality is always changing. And if we want to have an influence on how it changes, it's in our best interest to then accept things as they are right now, including all of the causes and effects. And lastly, a barrier to radically accepting might be that our emotions get in the way. Really strong emotions, being an emotion mind, can interfere with our ability to accept. Because you may feel that accepting will lead to experiencing unbearable and overwhelming emotions, right? So maybe there's a fear of the emotions. It also can get in the way, as we talked about, by finding the facts. What are the actual facts of the situation? And are the facts actually the facts, or are they distorted because I'm in emotion mind? And so those things can be a challenge. It's important to ask yourself, am I in wise mind? Are these objectionable facts of the situation, or are these more subjective and tainted by my emotions in this moment? If I'm having really strong emotions right now, maybe I should practice some distress tolerance skills, crisis survival skills that we've just finished talking about, or maybe some emotion regulation, to then get into a place where I'm closer to wise mind and more able to take the steps to practicing radical acceptance. So now finally, we're going to go through how, in fact, to practice this. So first, we want to start by observing that we are questioning reality. So what are the red flags that we might be rejecting reality? One of them is starting to notice that we're saying should. So it shouldn't be this way. He should do this. I should have done this. Really using the word should or shoulding all over ourselves can be a huge red flag that we are in fact rejecting reality instead of accepting that reality is as it is with all the causes and effects. After we recognize, okay, I'm starting to use should, I might be rejecting reality, we can remind ourselves that unpleasant reality is just as it is and it cannot be changed. This is what happened, right? And so using that, this is what happened, this is how it is, it really draws on our observing and describing skills, right? Practicing non-judgmentally, right? So our mindfulness skills of what and how. What am I observing? How would I describe it without using my emotional interpretation and without judgment? Then reminding ourselves that there are causes for the reality, right? There is a past, whether we can see it or not, that has led up to the current moment for us to experience it as it is. This requires us to acknowledge that everything occurs within a specific context and nothing occurs in a vacuum. Everything is linked. Encourage yourself to acknowledge that there is a history of actions and decisions that led up to the present moment. And consider how other people's lives have been shaped by a series of factors. Notice that given these causal factors and how history has unfolded, has led for reality to occur in just this way. This really calls on us to use our dialectical stance. So we are accepting reality as the only constant. We know that relationships can be loving, fulfilling, meaningful, and at the same time, our relationships can change. They face obstacles. We change as partners, as friends, and what we can give to the other person, just as the other person brings their own history and their own ability into the situation and relationship with us. We ourselves and the other individual in our relationship are shaped by our own, oftentimes difficult history and set of decisions, in addition to what we are also bringing. None of us are perfect. In life, there is even the soundest relationship curveballs, miscarriages, affairs, and for whatever causes there are, our reality has to take the present shape that it is. Being more mindful of the causes of both our own reality and what might be happening for others can help us take a step towards living a life within our values and accepting reality as it currently is. Next, we want to practice accepting with the whole self. This includes our mind, our body, and our spirit. We might need to be creative as we practice acceptance, using affirming and accepting self talk. Maybe we need to use relaxation skills, right? Maybe when we're saying, I'm accepting, we're white knuckling, our muscles are all tensing, right? So we're not really open and relaxed. And so it might take thinking about the circumstance paired with relaxation, maybe paced breathing, maybe paired muscle relaxation of our different muscle groups to help us really start practicing accepting with our body as well as our mind and our spirit. We might also try using half smile or willing hands while think of something that seems so unacceptable to us. And we'll talk more about those in the upcoming weeks. We also might use imagery, go to a safe place that may make acceptance more accessible for us, particularly when trying to accept a traumatic history or feeling triggered in the current moment. We might also practice opposite action. What are the behaviors we would use if we were to actually accept the facts? How could we kind of fake it until we make it, so to speak, in this situation? Can we engage in the behaviors as if we already fully accepted radically all the way completely, right? What would it look like if I fully accepted my breakup with my partner? How would I talk about my relationship? How might my environment change, right? Would I take down all the photos of us? Would I delete them off my phone? Would I block my partner or unblock my partner? What would accepting, right? Not avoiding, not denying, not suppressing, truly look like for that relationship? And it will look different for every relationship, right? How would I interact differently with him or her? How would my voice change when I'm talking about it? By asking ourselves those questions, we can start to really engage in effective opposite action and start to fake it till we make it, right? Slowly kind of getting our behaviors to change our thoughts and feelings. It takes a lot of practice. When we start to think about coping or opposite action, we also need to think about coping ahead, right? Coping ahead with events that just seem so unacceptable. Imagine believing what we don't want to accept and rehearse in our mind what you would do if you accepted what seems unacceptable. So, again, how would I think differently if I actually accepted what seems completely unthinkable? How might I think differently if I accepted the loss or death of a loved one? How might I, again, cope ahead with triggers of my loss? If I lost my father, for example, how might I approach being engaged or a wedding differently if I'm accepting that loss versus rejecting that loss? Naturally, this is going to stir up some bodily sensations because inevitably going to stir up some difficult emotions. And so it's important when practicing radical acceptance that we attend to body sensations as you think about what to accept. Practicing these steps can alter our body chemistry, and that's okay. Allow yourself to notice the changes in your body. Maybe I notice my racing heart or the pit in my stomach or racing thoughts when I think about losing my job or having to go back on the job market. Maybe I have all of those same sensations when I think about being alone and the loss of my relationship. I might notice and begin to engage in some tip skills, starting with paced breathing, moving to paired muscle relaxation, maybe intense exercise if it's bringing up feelings of anger, um, really tending to those bodily sensations as I think about what is difficult to accept. Next, I might allow for the disappointment, sadness, and grief to come. I would observe, and I encourage you all to observe the emotions, allowing ourselves to experience the intense pain while also calling on wise mind and a dialectical stance. This is very painful for me, and I will be okay. Right? When we think about suffering, that equation again, suffering equals pain plus non acceptance. And part of accepting is acknowledging that we are truly in pain and that there are some difficult emotions that come up within us surrounding this event. And we will be okay. We have the skills. We can call on our distress tolerance skills. We can call on phone coaching. We can call on emotional regulation, right? Our coping plan, all of those things to keep us safe while still accepting the fact that we are very much in pain. Last, we acknowledge that a life can be worth living even in the midst of pain. Remind ourselves of our values. How does accepting this situation move us closer to living out our values? How does accepting this situation move me closer to the life I want to live, even if it doesn't look exactly how I would like it, right? How can I still live out my life with in line with my values without this partner? With in face of the loss of my dad, right? How can I live out my values in the middle of a car accident, right? How do I want to really take the steps to accept all of those really painful and difficult and distressing moments in my life? And this might cause us to engage in some pros and cons if we find ourselves resisting this practice. What are the pros and cons of rejecting reality? What are the pros and cons of accepting this reality? And then practice. Practice these steps. And as we talk with turning the mind, it might take multiple reminders and multiple attempts of going through all of these steps until we truly feel like we are in a place that we are accepting. As a final reflection, I encourage you to think about what are you struggling to accept in your life right now? What situation kind of comes to mind as we are talking through radical acceptance? What are the ways in which you find yourself rejecting reality in that situation? And at the same time, I think it's really important that you take a step back and think of examples of things you've had to accept in your life and that you did not approve of. And really give yourself a pat on the back for how you were able to accept those and move forward and calling on those skills in face of a new situation now.